In the words of Walt Disney, all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. Born on the 14th of December 1934, Shyam Benegal dared to have a dream. At a tender age of 12, when he got his first camera from his photographer father Sridhar B. Benegal, Shyam Benegal hasn't stopped feeding our hungry minds with the most wonderful cinema, documentaries, television shows, books et al. Being a proud recipient of various awards, his unmatched talent is as great as his humble personality. Travel with me through the journey of one of the finest filmmakers of all times, the legend Shyam Benegal, only on the Bollywood Dynasty.
I never studied film formally. There was no film institute in my time when I was growing up. But when the Film Institute was actually formed, which was in 1960-61, by that time, of course, I was a full-fledged professional. So there was no question of my going and studying there. But I was taking occasional classes. I would go and occasionally lecture at the Film Institute. But later on, in 1980, Government of India invited me to become the chairman of the institute. So I became the chairman of the institute from 1980 to 83, and once again later from 1988 to 91. So I've had close association with the events at the Film and Television Institute, also in terms of the curricular practice, in terms of the extension of the syllabus, all sorts of things like that. But now, it's a long time ago when you think of it, because the last time I was directly connected with the institute is already 25 years ago. So I haven't had too much to do with the institute in recent years, but if they ask me for anything, I'm willing to offer my views on the subject, because I've always had a kind of soft corner for that institution. Their talent and their ability. See, it's not how a person looks to your eye that is important. It is how a person looks to the camera eye that's important. Because you see, some people could be very good looking but not photogenic. But a person who's photogenic need not necessarily be good looking. The important, the term photogenic is for someone who, once you look at that person, you can't take your eyes off that person. It's nothing to do with excellent features and things like that. It has to do with the personality. And it's the question of what is it, that there are people who can project their personalities in ways that other people cannot. Now, in cinema, this is far more important than in the theater or anything else. Because in the cinema, this is what it is. Because the way the actor projects his or her personality, that comes through to you as an audience. And I think this is what the quality of these people is, whether it is Shabana Azmi, whether it's Smita Patel, the Som Puri, Nasiruddin Shah, Amrish Puri, any of them. If you look at that whole bunch of people, because there are quite a large number of them, much younger people also later on, and even some actors, let's say like Manoj Vajpayee, for instance, and so on. So you have a whole group of actors who are very different from the earlier generation of actors. But they are all absolutely wonderful actors, apart from having personalities that are very distinct. They're not just good-looking people. They have distinct personalities. And that personality comes through. That is the important thing for an actor, particularly a cinema actor. I haven't made too many children's films. There was only one film that I made that was specifically meant for children, was with Charan Das Chor. And Charan Das Chor itself, as you know, was a very well-known play done by that very legendary theatre director Habib Tanveer. And Habib did Charandas Chor. About that time, when he used to produce Charandas Chor all over the country, I invited him to be part of a group where we would make different kinds of children's learning programs. And I would use his village actors to play many of the parts. And this whole series, we did about 35 programs, essentially meant for, for learning programs for children between the ages of 5 and 15, which was used extensively, all over the country. During that time, I felt that Habib's own production also needed to be made into a film. So that's how I made Charandas Chor as a film, which became extremely successful as a children's film. Also had a fair amount of commercial success. Even now, I think, when there's a children's film festival, they do show Charandas Chor. Although it was made many, many years ago. It was made in 1974. There was no plan or any specific project as such. But the fact is that I ended up making 3 films that you could consider in some fashion a trilogy. Like you had Mammo, for instance. Then I made Sardari Begum, and then finally Zubeda. And it so happened that because those 3 films were all written by Khalid Mohammed, and Khalid Mohammed was very well known, as you know, film critic, writer, used to work with Times of India for a long time. Now, he had chosen these characters who were actually related to him. You see, now the Zubeda that I made as a film, Zubeda happened to be his mother. You see, and then the others were aunts, or great aunt, and so on. So those 3 films became a kind of trilogy. They were not meant to be a trilogy. It just so happened that he brought a script to me and said, would this make an interesting film? I said, most certainly it will. And then once I made that film, which was Mammo, immediately he had another story, which was Sardari Begum. And then finally he wrote the script of Zubeda. So those 3 films were made almost one after the other. And they became, in a manner of speaking, a trilogy. I make the films that I want to make, and they are determined by me. The creative viewpoint is mine. And so therefore they have what one might call an individual point of view. They are not necessarily films that are made to order. You understand? It's not as though they are industrial products. They are works that come out of my experience, my imagination. So if they have a distinct character, they're bound to have a distinct character. Look at other filmmakers who have made films of that kind. I'm not only talking about people who concern themselves with purely artistic cinema, but also people who were very concerned with the commercial successes of their films. I'll give you an example. You can make, if you see a film by B.R. Chopra, you can make out that it's a B.R. Chopra film. If you see a film made by Mehboob, you can make out it's a film made by Mehboob. So their individual stamp is there. If you see a film by Raj Kapoor, it's the same thing. There's an individual stamp. Now that is what is important. You see, where there is an individual stamp, you can see that person's stamp in that film. When you look at, there are so many other films you cannot make out who's made what. They're faceless films. No, I'm not really concerned or interested in making films of that nature. On television, I did about 4 or 5 different things. Yatra was the first one, which were 2 of the longest journeys you can take in the country. There were 15 episodes. East-West journey and north-south journey, longest trips you can take by train in the country. So it was like introducing India to ourselves. So that was, but it had many individual stories, of course. But the fact was that it's basically a story of the length and breadth of India. You know, you get to see what India actually is. Now, the biggest series that I made was Bharate Khoj, which was the history of India, the entire history of India, which was 53 hours. And it was based primarily on Jawaharlal Nehru's book, Discovery of India. So, and Jawaharlal Nehru had also written this book when he wrote it to see for himself, or to understand for himself what this nation was, of which he was part of. So that's why he called it Discovery of India. And I based my series primarily on his work, yet I did have about 15 different authorities for different periods of time, so that whatever I did would be historically correct. There would be, I mean, if you went to school and you were shown these films, it was real history. So that was one of the ambitions that I had, which I think was met when I made Bharate Khoj. Then after that, I've made several smaller ones. Now the last one I did was Samvidhan, which is the story of the Indian Constitution. Now, they can be long or they can be shorter. This was a 10-hour series, Samvidhan. Bharate Khoj was 53 hours. Yatra was 15. Then there were short stories that I had done. You know, a whole series of them, about 9 or 10 of those, and so on, you see. So that I've done work for both television as well as cinema. Shama Zaidi and I have worked with each other ever since the early 1970s, beginning of 1970s, because she has been with me since then, in one capacity or another, either in the capacity of a researcher or in the capacity of a writer. So she has done different kinds of things. So my association with her is a very old one. It goes back 45 years, you know. So it's not an association of now. And so she has been part of a very large number of my films and television series. So she has sort of been on that journey with me from then, you know. Similarly, Atul Tiwari, for instance, he too from the time of Bharate Khoj. So there are people who we have worked together for many, many years together. My cameramen also were like that, you know, until they decided to do their own things, like Govind Nilani, for instance. We started together way back, it goes back to 1967, 68, and but then he became a filmmaker on his own, so he's doing his own thing. You know, different people like that.